One of the most immediately striking things to me when I first left the gates of Cassidus was just how familiar I was with the environment in front of me. Gransys takes the realistic approach, unlike many games, of having the biome in the game pretty much be uniform throughout, so right off the bat the world is cohesive and doesn't feel like it's artificially shrunk down for the sake of a navigable video game. Sure, you'll come to rockier bits, thicker woodland, wider plains, darker caves, but I always got the feeling that Gransys is a plausible location that anyone could just go to. It's very similar to the feeling I got with Majula when I first played Dark Souls 2, where I felt like I'd been to that coast before, seen those ruins, looked out over that ocean, and so on. The terrain, roads, beaches, and brush of Gransys all feel reasonable. None of the walkable hills are too steep, and speaking of steep, the valleys! There are parts of the game where you'll find yourself looking into the distance either side of you and seeing the towering faces of an enormous valley surrounding you. You can't go up there, of course, because you pretty much have all the traversal options of a real person. Walk, jump, run, climb ledges and ladders, so on. Yes, there are ferry stones you can use for fast travel, but you need to walk to those places first, and every time you take a walk in this world, you'll feel more at home in it. Even with fiendish beasts and bands of thugs prowling the roads, it would feel wrong to hop on a horse and gallop past everything. You will walk through every path this game gives you, and you will experience it all as a person on the ground, just as tied to this land as everyone else in it who has no place to call home. Occasionally you might find something more interesting, a standout feature in the land, like some Nazca lines depicting a hero without a heart, much like yourself. And oops, would you look at that? Capcom just tied the story to the environment. Isn't that nice of them? The history of the Arisen, your role, is etched into the very earth of Gransys, which begs the question of why? And how many of you have there been? But we're jumping way too far ahead here. Questions like that are for when I talk about the story, not the environment. Your exploration of Gransys will be consistently tough, I'd argue, partly because of the previously mentioned limited movement options, but also just how frequently you'll end up having your attention drawn from the path. A lot of the time it'll be some kind of enemy encounter you'll need to defend yourself from, but sometimes you might see something in the distance and head over there to check it out. Now you're on a new path, discovering new places, getting wrecked in the early game by a chimera or something. It's because of this that I'd say, despite how Gransys is technically quite a small open world, it can actually feel quite big due to the difficulty that manual travel poses. When you want to go somewhere in Breath of the Wild, for instance, you can take whatever path you like. You can climb down every mountain and steer clear of every enemy along the way. Hell, even run up a mountain and glide off if you really want to. Take it further, in Tears of the Kingdom, you can make a machine and drive or even fly there. Those games are great in their own right, but forcing your player to walk through your world every time they want to get somewhere means they have to engage with everything you put on their path to some degree. Maybe there's a group of harpies eating a dead ox, and they grow agitated when you get closer. Go around them? Okay, now you're off the beaten path and may find yourself at the mercy of goblins and bandits in the area. Where are you going again? You better get back to that path before nightfall, because you won't be seeing shit when the sun goes down. Hope you've got a lantern with you, you'll need it. And does it have oil? So yeah, moving from point A to point B is almost always something more than just that, even if it is just enemy encounters that get you. The game presents a sense of discovery that somehow differentiates itself from many other games, and it's so refreshing. Speaking of discovery, how about the structures? One comparison I will draw to another game you might have heard of is that I had a similar sense of curiosity looking at the Blue Moon Tower in the distance as I did in Elden Ring when I saw the Forge of the Giants all the way from Limgrave. You can see this huge stone thing in the distance from the very start of the game. Desperately want to go there, but you need to develop as both a player and a character in order to do so. That's one of the great things about really good open world games, their ability to organically show you something cool from later in the game stripped of its context, then just let you go about your business. There's no cutscene introducing the Blue Moon Tower until you get there, but you see it and want to go there anyway. The most you'll hear about it before then is your pawn simply pointing it out in the distance. I had no idea how far away it was on my first playthrough, or what road I'd have to take to get me there.
There, a tower in the distance. What says the map, Arisen?
Set pieces like this serve a great role in creating an engaging and curious world, since they act as an easy hook for the player. I'm sure I'm not breaking any new ground when I say, teasing your audience with something important from a later section of your media will drive them to find out more by actively engaging more. Show your audience something cool early on so they'll feel even more excited about the prospect of learning about it organically, and will be measurably more satisfied when they do. That is, of course, if you get the payoff right, and my god, when you do go to that tower in the story, it's exactly the right payoff. I love that quest. Oh, and for a minute there I almost forgot to talk about the Everfall and other underground bits, and the Witchwood. In a way, you could count the Everfall and the Catacombs and Bitter Black Isle as other ruins, but they're sort of their own thing in my mind. Honestly, I'll probably go into much more depth about these things when I talk about the story, but here I'll just talk about them in a vacuum. The Witchwood is a curious area to me. It's somehow both an incredibly claustrophobic place, helped in that by the fog amulets, and weirdly comforting despite the wolves and spiders around every corner. There's of course a witch at the heart of it, right where the forest connects back to the first part of the open world, and she herself has a pretty cool story. This wood is serene, untarnished by the destructive hands of the men who prowl around just outside its entrance. Now, the Everfall is, before you kill the dragon, likely an area you'll visit once. It's a huge spiral staircase around a central hole under the earth. It's clearly not a natural structure, but it seems nobody in the world knows its true origins. At the very least, the base game's mystery surrounding this area, both before and after it turns into a boss select endgame section, is very intriguing. It has some connection to the pawns, and as we'll find out from Bitter Black Isle, the one in Gran Soren isn't the only one. That said, the one under Gran Soren certainly adds a certain tension to that place when you know that some unknown, untamed power rests down there. And the Catacombs, yet another area that gets its tone spot on. If you thought the Witchwood was claustrophobic, I'd love to see how you deal with this. Although the Catacombs are a lot more linear than most other areas, including the Witchwood, so it's not as easy to get lost as you might imagine. That said, it consists of dark, narrow corridors that all look similar, lined with countless sarcophagi you'll recognise from outside. Opening each of them could give you riches, nothing, a curse, a rarity, or wake the dead within. Speaking of the dead within, there are unsurprisingly a lot of zombies and skeletons roaming around this place thanks to the perpetual darkness. There are even bits where the human-made architecture stops and you're exposed to open caves, really adding to the ancient feel of this place. When you're looking at the locations in a game, it's easy to accept the trope that loads of biomes are all connected in one walkable world. I mentioned Elden Ring earlier, but even that game forces me to suspend my disbelief about the size of the world. You're telling me that the areas we explore, which do admittedly have a great sense of scale from the perspective of a person-sized person, are meant to be seen as vast lands that were ruled over by actual demigods. It can take under 10 hours to thoroughly do everything in Limgrave available at the start of the game without hurrying. There's plenty of game, and it's a great world, but sometimes I can't take the size of it seriously. Oh man, I don't like how familiar that sentence sounded. Some games do the biome thing well, like a lot of Monster Hunter games, where the biomes are mostly their own separate maps, but I do think that Dragon's Dogma 1 stands out for not doing that at all. You don't get a snowy mountain, a volcanic hellscape, or a barren desert. You get Gransys, a realistic, medieval setting, in exactly the type of environment you would find in the real world, somewhere with that kind of history behind it. And of course how it all ties into the story. Hilfiger Knoll, which I mentioned earlier, is directly connected to an important character, and the Everfall adds a literal depth and mystery to the world. As small as the open world is by modern standards, I would say this game's location rivals any I've seen in any game for just how immersed I was able to get. And there was one last aspect I wanted to talk about regarding the environment, and that's the explorability and how bloody well it clicked with me. For a little context, growing up, I would go on holiday every year with my immediate family to somewhere else in England, usually near the coast, but always with some history that my parents were interested in. As a kid, I never really found the information boards that interesting, but I was over the moon when I saw a castle or other ruins. Depending on where we were, I was able and allowed to run through the fields and climb on the ruins of ancient structures. I would sometimes envision what it would look like in a less ruined state, but I'd be lying if I said the most fun part was anything other than the climbing itself. So now I'm legally an adult, and I'll be judged by more adult standards than when I was a prepubescent little monkey lad. Ignore that my profile picture is me at 18 years of age sitting inside a tree stump pretending to be a Korok. I'm not in much of a position anymore to just climb everything I see, so having Gransys be designed in such a way that I can explore freely in castle ruins and find chests by doing so, and accidentally stumble upon a compulsory quest item without first seeing the hints that the game was ready to show me, thus heavily incentivizing me to continue climbing things, made me very quickly connect with this game, possibly more effectively through this system than any other. I mean, for God's sake, you can even climb around the upper parts of Gran Soren. So yeah, in conclusion, Gransys was made by people who know what it's like to see a ledge and want to climb it, and it was made by people who understand the seemingly endless joy of discovery.